Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products.
All right, welcome everyone. It is June 2nd, 2021. Frank, what episode number is this?
50-something.
50-something to Microsoft Security Insights Podcast. Welcome everyone. Obviously, Edward is not here. Frank, do you have an update on Edward? Apparently he ran a race and it takes him 2 weeks to recover. Is that the fact?
He's been texting me from Mexico, so yeah.
Wow,
I'm sure he'll give you the. If you thought the SC200 story, him taking the exam and what happened was interesting. Wait till you hear the race story when he gets back.
Oh well, apparently he literally does not exist according to Microsoft certification. So my guess is he's probably in a Mexican jail because he has no ID, right?
That could be the case. Yeah. Mexico checks your MCP ID, right?
They do.
They do. Okay.
They check for your certifications and for COVID. So they both kind of go hand in hand. If you have certifications, you can pretty much get in anywhere, even without a mask. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just making things up. It doesn't even make sense.
So we had to get 2 co-hosts to replace Edward.
As always.
Who else do we have here tonight as a co-host?
Nathan, you're here, right?
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
It's been a long time since you've been on the show. Glad to have you back.
Has been. Just been keeping my head down, grinding on Azure Sentinel and Azure Defender.
And what have you learned since the last time we talked to you?
Oh, all kinds of fun things. But primarily, too, just been working. And the third thing I didn't mention was like Azure Firewall Premium that had been announced several months ago, kind of hit public preview. And just been working with a lot of customers, architecting that out and getting it implemented. And primarily, interestingly enough, had done some work with Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure Firewall Premium, making sure that the management plane was opened up through the firewall so that the Windows Virtual Desktop host could kind of talk to it. So all good stuff. So you always get to learn something when you work at Microsoft. It's always constantly evolving.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's cool. Hey, so speaking of new things that were released recently that kind of need to kind of keep an eye on, I don't know if you heard this, Nathan, Frank. I was having a discussion yesterday about Azure, about Defender for servers, and kind of like someone mentioned that the best practice for deploying Defender for servers for on-prem to the cloud was to use Arc, Azure Arc potentially. I hadn't heard that before. So now I'm going to have to dig into Azure Arc, which I've kind of been reluctant to do so.
You'll learn it within an hour. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Not much to it. It does support both modes. So you can still do hybrid from on-prem with the log analytics agent rather than Azure Arc, but you get some nice added benefits with using Azure Arc. So.
Yeah. Thought that was interesting. Just realized about 30 minutes ago while I was brewing my coffee that you can now change the schedule on an analytics rule in Azure Sentinel and save it, and it automatically kicks off that analytics rule, almost like you're running a hunting query. That didn't exist before. I kind of hoped that would happen eventually, but looks like it finally happened out of the blue.
Oh, okay. So that's nice. So if you're trying to do some testing, right, prototyping some stuff with your analytic rules,
yeah,
you don't want to wait the 15 minutes, or maybe the analytic rules, like maybe, some of them are like a day, right, with a summarized report. So you're saying like you can go in and just change the time quickly?
Just change the schedule, just minutely, right? So I changed it from, I forget, like 12 hours to like 13 hours or something silly like that, right? And it automatically kicked off and generated an incident because I had actually created that that alert in my environment about 12 hours ago. So it still existed in that log file that it was looking back through. So yeah. thought that.
Now, when you're developing the rules, I mean, do you spend more time just prototyping over and just the query analyzer than copy and paste it in anyways at that point? And what is your process to bring one of these rules to life?
Bring the rule to life, like Dr. Frankenstein. I just develop my queries in the logs blade, and if they look good, then I paste them into the analytics rule. I don't create them in the rule itself usually. So that's me, Nathan.
Have you taken advantage of the new entities yet?
Yeah, but kind of not from a production standpoint, more just testing and figuring things out. What was the other thing that just released? So the entities, but also, this one's interesting too. Just the modifying the UEBA stuff, right? So the timeline information, you can create your own custom info to look at through user entity behavior.
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting, right? Because you think about the timeline that you see on that entity page for the account or maybe the IP address, and then being able to bring in like third-party logs, like VPN logs, or maybe the Okta log, right? And you want to show that in the timeline for around that account, the instance. Being able to bring in those different logs based off anything you can query really in the KQL language, and then drop it if it toggles it, move it into that UEBA timeline, which is really fascinating because I think it opens the door up to some other contextual information, right? That UEBA maybe wasn't providing. That if you're a SOC person or someone in a company, you might go, hey, I want to know about these certain types of events, right, that occur in some of our identity and access logins, or maybe in some of our things. The other interesting thing too about that, you think about it, right? Like, I haven't worked with a customer yet, but like if you want to bring in the physical, as people start returning back to the office, right? You want to bring in the physical badge, right? Logins, right? Someone uses a badge and you want to wire those logs into Sentinel, like physical access locations and where they were kind of going into. You could bring that in and bring that into that UEBA timeline. So now you're not only getting like the sign-ins, right, from like Azure AD or Office 365 and stuff, but you're also getting like potentially in the timeline the physical badge reader, right, as the employee swiping and going through the process. So that it opens the door to some really neat scenarios, I think.
Well,
I think
what's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's interesting is that, when everybody had to go work from home, there's all these, how to secure working from home. Now I'm starting to get the webinar invites of what's the process to bring people and the equipment back into the office in a secure way. So, it's come full circle to that. So it was interesting to start seeing those invites coming in. Do you trust the machine coming back in? I mean, what's the deal? So I'll have to attend a few of those webinars out there. I did go to a webinar today, which was the KPMG Azure Sentinel or Azure Incident Response webinar. I'll put a link in there, and I have to say that, so since I'm more of the digital forensics incident response side, I have to say this was a must-see webinar for anyone that deals with that, or people that have to plan for that on that side. It was really an excellent webinar. It will now be one of my top webinars to recommend for people that are implementing Sentinel.
So will there be a replay, did they say?
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, I enjoy anything like that. Speaking of UEBA, they're going to have to change the name, I think, just to EBA, because since you're adding everything else but users, doesn't really make sense. The other thing I want to note about that is, oh my goodness, people may hate me for this. I'm sure we'll argue about it to the end of time, but UEBA is probably the most important feature released to Azure Sentinel over the last year.
I don't know those watch list features.
Well, they're going to get better, and they might supersede UEBA or EBA. So we should officially rename that feature today. What do you think? We should take a vote. Is it just?
There we go.
Yeah.
It's no longer user based. It's IP based, entity based, host based,
Just entity.
file based. Yeah.
Eat everything, right?
Yeah.
EDA.
How about ABE, artifact based, or ABA? No, that
The
one.
entity is the artifact, right?
It is.
So,
Just a little play on words.
well, let's get to our guest tonight, and Rod
Yes.
can do the introduction.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I love the topic tonight since Edward is not here, and I thought we'd go the other way with this since Edward was not here, but that's okay.
I thought you'd appreciate that. So we have a guest tonight. I think is absolutely wonderful. I've known her in fact, this is a good story. So everybody knows Azure Sentinel is literally the only thing I do, pretty much. And like over the last year, before I entered this role as a customer engineer, I had literally over the past year delivered 65, 66, 67, I forget the number, workshops for Azure Sentinel. One of my earliest workshops, like within the original 10 workshops, I was in Bakersfield, California, delivering to one of Sarahzin's customers out there. We don't have to mention the customer because I don't know if they're still using it. So anyway, but she was like one of my very first Microsoft full-time employee friends. So really near and dear to my heart. Plus, if she can remind me that barbecue place we ate at, I've been trying to remember the name of that forever. But anyway, Sarahzin she's a PM in MCAS, which we've had lots of discussion about MCAS on this podcast over the course of many months, many episodes. MCAS is one of the noisiest services. No, I'm just kidding.
So what is MCAS for people that are new to the podcast? Rod?
MCAS is Microsoft Cloud App Security. It literally, I joke that it is the noisiest. I joke that it's the noisiest service ever because it takes a lot of tuning, but at the same time, it is absolutely probably one of the best services because it literally captures everything, even the things you don't want to know about. It captures those. And that's actually a good thing because you can tune that stuff out. But anyway, I wanted to introduce Sarahzin. Go ahead and kind of introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're doing and where you're at and all that good stuff.
Yep, of course. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarahzin. Like Rod said, we actually go way back. It's really cool because there are many people that you get to meet right when you're traveling a lot. And most of the time, it's not your fellow colleagues at Microsoft. And so you meet a lot of customers and great people, but there are very few folks. On my list, I can probably count maybe 5 Microsoft people I've actually met in real life that I consider friends, and Rod's definitely one of them. So I thought it was really cool to kind of come back to that. And I don't remember the barbecue place name, but the meat, I'm a huge meat lover. So definitely when we went, I definitely remember some of the steak and the food that we ended up getting. So I'll look that up and I'll get back to you on that. But besides that, I'm one of the PMs on the customer experience engineering team for MCAS and MDI, but mainly focus on MCAS, Cloud App Security for that matter there. And I'm located in Southern California. This makes me really happy, but I brag that I'm about 15 minutes from Disneyland because I'm a huge Disney fan. So it's something that makes me just enjoy living in the super, super sunny and hot state here. So, but really, I started out as a premier field engineer, known as, I think, a customer engineer now, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yep.
So started out doing information protection and MCAS, and then I moved into the customer experience engineering role about a little bit over a year ago, doing solely MCAS and overall information protection. So I'm very excited to be here today and kind of curious as to what questions I have in store for me with the noisiest service out there. So.
So welcome. Yeah, thank you for joining us this evening. A lot of people join and they get a little bit nervous. What should I talk about? It's literally just want to talk about anything and everything. But I think in respect to your role at Microsoft, I'm most interested, I think, and I think a lot of our customers and a lot of listeners are generally interested in what a product manager does. You mentioned the customer experience. So there's different types of product managers within Microsoft. you're obviously focused in a certain area. So what's your interaction with customers? What's your day look like?
Gotcha. So my day, I would say, is mainly focused on, I would say 60-40% doing different things. So 60% with customer work, where I go through advanced use cases with the customers and kind of help tune MCAS a little bit more to their needs outside of what we just have with the out-of-the-box policies in place. And then the remaining 40%, we do things on the sides of like outreach, creating training, doing webinars, doing just things to kind of promote the product a little bit more, and finding out different ways to maybe better the product for that matter. So on a day-to-day basis, I'll have maybe 5 or 6 calls with customers. We're in their environment. We're talking about some of the alerts that they're getting. They come to us with like a specific use case. Like, okay, so I have 2 different SharePoint sites that I go through and have sensitive information in, right? And I want to make sure that nobody from a group that's not allowed to access this site uploads a specific file. How do I go through and create that in MCAS and kind of walk through and help tune the product to meet those scenarios, right? So they typically bring in their scenarios that are not with our cookie cutter policies we have in place. And you just kind of walk through and typically kind of help them out with those. In addition, we have a lot of integrations, right? So like one of them is actually Sentinel. And this is where I'm going to poke your brain a little bit too to make sure that the information that we're giving is correct. They often ask us things like, so with MCAS, we pride ourselves in that we have so many different integrations, right? We have things from information protection, we have from Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity. All those also, I believe, have their individual connectors in Sentinel as well. So the question that I get asked all the time is, if we have everything coming into MCAS, and then MCAS is sending that information over to Sentinel, how do we avoid? Are we getting duplicates of information, or is it doing some correlation? And it's something that we're asked all the time. And so what we've been saying is MCAS does its own analysis on the information, and you're sending over alerts and discovery data, and then Sentinel is taking over, I guess, like the raw data from those endpoints and actually correlating everything together. So I'm not sure if that's correct, but I wanted to make sure that I brought it up here too, because it's something that we're asked on a weekly basis.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. So we do have the integration with all those services, and for customers don't know, our first-party services, which MCAS is what we consider a first-party service, is a free ingested source. So it's really easy to connect it to Azure Sentinel. There's no cost for ingesting those alerts. Obviously, we're not sending log files. If it was log files, there would be a cost to ingest. Moving data always costs something, but it's just the alerts. So we allow MCAS to do its fantastic job by producing the alerts around what it is focused on. Those alerts are synced into Azure Sentinel. Azure Sentinel does some things with that. Number one, to help avoid duplicates. So, if things are sent during a certain time range, it's going to kind of group those things together. Another thing that it does is ties MCAS alerts together with other data sources that we're connecting. So it tries to kind of more granularly tie the storyline together versus just looking at just a bunch of alerts. So it does kind of correlate that data and refine it just a little bit to help eliminate the duplicates. Other than that, our analytics rules that are built around things like MCAS. So if you have an MCAS administrator, because a lot of our customers, these different security areas, they'll have one person that is responsible for each of these areas a lot of times. So you have the MCAS person. If that MCAS person sucks at their job and can't tune it correctly, then we can actually do things in Azure Sentinel so the security folks don't have to deal with some of the garbage that might come over, right? Strong words, I know, but there's ways to kind of compensate for that. Even if we, for some reason, for whatever crazy reason, we do get a duplicate, we can go into Azure Sentinel and make sure that we refine that so that eventually we'll probably send an email to that person's manager or kick them in the can when we see them in the hallway or something. I don't know.
So some of this is changing over time. So because of the new M365 Defender connector and the bidirectional incident management that they've put in place. Okay, I have heavy opinions in this area because It always drove me crazy that on the connectors, the individual connectors, they would say create an incident and it was recommended. It said it recommended. It drove me absolutely nuts that they did that, right? Because I did believe in sending over the alerts so you could correlate that with other things. But I did not recommend creating the incidents because the incidents, in theory, were going to be handled in the unified portal of Defender. Okay, and so this was before the bidirectional incident management capability. So still today, I think that there's organizations have to figure out, you know, the unified portal versus Sentinel and where they're going to go with it and the features and functionality that you actually get out of the unified portal that's not available with inside Sentinel unless you do the extra click off of the incident to take you back over to the unified portal. So I'm glad to see that they have the extra click to go out to the unified portal, but a lot of the functions, and obviously with Defender for Identity getting more pages and everything being pushed over into the unified portal, there's just too much features and functionality that's not available immediately with inside Sentinel. So you really have to think about what data you're sending over. And then, of course, so I'm more of a Defender for Endpoint person. So then I have to take a look at the log data that I do want to send up to Sentinel with the new, because the connectors, the individual connectors could not send over the log data. Now with M365 Defender connector, you can, and they're bringing the different products online for Defender for Endpoint, you can send over that raw data, which gets around some of the length of being able to do hunting on data and when it's removed out of the Defender portal. So it all comes down to the Security Operations Center and how they want to manage incidents now, since we have the bidirectional incident management.
So we do have bidirectional for that, but correct me if I'm wrong. Number one, MCAS is not in that unified portal yet. And number two, we still don't have bidirectional sync with MCAS, so that's totally different.
So the second part is right, but the first part, MCAS, is sending some alerts over. Not everything yet, and it's on our roadmap to hopefully send almost everything over.
Okay. All right. So partially. Okay. That's cool.
So, yeah, and kind of on the, sorry, go ahead.
No. Keep going.
No, I was just going to say, so it's funny because the kind of going back to the original thought of how MCAS generates quite a few alerts, right? And depending on how you view it, not every alert is an incident. Sometimes you're just being alerted when somebody, I don't know, logs in, right? So very recently I had a customer, I'm not going to go into the name, but they were creating policies, right? And for each of our policies, we have an alert limit about 1,000 per day. And they wanted us to increase that number to 10,000 alerts per policy per day. And they wanted to send that information over into Sentinel. And so I sat there, and really you don't, there's a thing called alert fatigue, right? And I definitely get that from just being alerted on everything, an email, text message, whatnot. And so I couldn't imagine having that many alerts for one policy. And they're very simple policies too. Not anything like you're actually doing some sort of digging into like what's happening. It's more so like this person's logging into Office 365 and you want to be alerted on that. Or this, anytime somebody logs in, and they wanted to send all those alerts over into Sentinel. And it was definitely something I was like, nope. But they still went ahead and opened a ticket to increase that. So.
So what is the SLA, I guess, for MCAS as far as exposing the logs or exposing alerts to the third-party services? Is there an SLA?
So what do you mean by the third-party services there? Do you mean
sending it to potentially to Azure Sentinel, or sending MCAS alerts to another SIEM or something like that?
So I believe it's 24 hours for Sentinel. I'll have to double check on that. And then on the additional SIEMs that we have, it depends on log collector, and not log collector, sorry, the server that you set up and sending the data over. I've had customers go through where they literally will configure it so that it's sending the data over once a week. So you have a little more control because you're configuring that collector there to send that information over. So yeah. So typically it's about 24 hours. You get all the alerts, you send it, and you send it a couple times. But I've seen it where they want it at one go and to have all the data there at that certain time. So
Yeah, the reason why I asked that, I was working with a customer today, and they weren't seeing the MCAS alerts in Sentinel, and sometimes there's a latency. It's not just MCAS; it's any third-party service or first-party service in this respect that you connect. So you kind of, because literally the way that we do our data connectors, it's pulling that API on a regular basis, and if there's nothing to collect, there's nothing to collect. It's just so you kind of have to go back to the originating service sometimes to figure out what's going on.
But then if you're utilizing those alerts with inside any rules with inside Sentinel, you have to deal with the time delay that could be coming in. Take that into consideration.
Yeah. And the other thing to note is that some of the data that we pull into MCAS from the APIs, they each have their own SLAs. So some of those alerts are coming into MCAS itself in 30 minutes or in an hour or within 24 hours, depending on what it is. So you're getting that delayed from the API in general going to MCAS. So there may be delay from that going into Sentinel even more so.
Interesting. Didn't think about that. So how many different sources are going into MCAS, by the way?
So it depends. If you're doing the APIs, we have about 13 app connectors, but it's also on what you choose to alert, because you can also do condition access app control, real-time session controls, and be alerted on that. So though that's not an app connector, it could still be considered a data source of at least the alerts that are being sent over. So
can you give our listeners, like, what are you talking about? What are these connectors?
Gotcha.
Are they to what service?
Gotcha. So we have partnerships with an API-based. With things such as like you have AWS. I know we own GitHub, but we also have GitHub, Box, Dropbox, G Suite, all these different apps. We connect them to MCAS using things like APIs. And what that does is, depending on the app itself, you'll be pulling in things like activity logs or files APIs. So for instance, with something like Box is one of our more robust APIs where you can actually use MCAS to apply a Microsoft Information Protection label on the file that's in Box as well. And that's all done through those APIs, whether it's activity-based or if it's files-based, you're pulling that information over. There's typically a little bit of a delay getting that information over into MCAS. That really depends on the APIs themselves and based off of the agreements that they have in general with MCAS on how often they'll be sending us, how often we can request it. But that's a way of getting what we call near real-time data, because every person's definition of near real-time is different. Some folks say it's 5 minutes. Some people say it's within 24 hours. So it really depends. What are you doing, Rod?
Sorry.
So, you're good. That's on the near real-time side. Now the real-time is using conditional access app control, which is our a reverse proxy in which we can use things like Azure Active Directory or another IDP such as Okta or Ping1 to basically take the traffic of your apps, use single sign-on, and forward that into MCAS, where you can actually, within that session itself, put in some protections like requiring somebody to apply encryption when they're downloading a file from an unmanaged device, or blocking logins to apps, all browser-based, if they're logging in from unmanaged. And it doesn't have to just be unmanaged. That's just one of our most common use cases there. So those are the two different ways you can get some app data into MCAS. And we see a combination of both. We're often asked, is one used more than the other? I would say on the app connector side, Office 365 is used a little bit more than using conditional access app control, but there's no preference of one or the other. It's just more so of how you want to evaluate your environment there.
So since you're on also do the information protection side, so third-party DLP integration, do you have that? I'm trying to remember.
We do. It's not commonly used. I would say that out of my team in general, we had one customer who was using a third-party DLP provider, but they ended up not using it just because it wasn't as robust as our built-in integrations. And so, but it's not used that much, but we do have it, and it is something that we can definitely integrate into the system. So if you are interested, or we have a documentation on it, it's just not, I would say we've maybe done it twice or thrice with a customer. It's just not very common at all.
So when will more of like the Defender for Identity, because I always found it strange that you go to MCAS for Defender for Identity investigations. I just always found that strange. So when will all that be moved over to the unified portal?
So that is upcoming. It's currently in the works. We don't have an official date internally, but it is something that is upcoming, and we're still looking at how it'll be in MCAS as well as in the unified portal at the same time. There are certain alerts from Defender for Identity that are already going in there, just not everything just yet. But there's a full convergence that is definitely being planned right now.
So do you see the entire MCAS portal going away and just being the unified portal?
Not yet. I think more so I think it's mainly because customers may prefer to just buy a CASB by itself, and we're trying to keep something along those lines. But I do definitely see some ability to just do everything in the unified portal or use MCAS, and it'll be my hope is it'll be bi-directional there. So that's a Sarahzin wish there.
So do you see? So it's interesting. Is MCAS a M365 Defender product or MCAS an information protection product?
So I think it depends on who you ask on my team. And the reason I say that is because so I focus on information protection side, right? But one of my colleagues, she mainly focuses on threat protection. So because we have our focus areas, depending on what you're asking, it can definitely be either or there. So you have, like, for instance, the information protection, our file policies, they're all being sent to the compliance portal for alerts for the data protection. At the same time, for our threat protection side, we're also sending that into the unified portal. So we have a kind of a combination of both, and our alerts are definitely being split depending on the portals. And Microsoft loves their portals. So
Yes.
Yeah. So I would say it depends on who you ask. I lean towards information protection a little bit more, but I do definitely see the value on threat protection side.
Nate, you've been pretty quiet there. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask too, like, do you see the product also providing kind of any posture management capabilities in the future or in current state?
So,
because you're collecting all this stuff from these different clouds like Dropbox and AWS and stuff.
Yeah, we actually do have that available right now. It's part of our configuration there. We show you the sys recommendations from AWS, GCP, and Azure at the same in the same page there. I will say that it is very similar to Azure Security Center, and our goal is to improve on that connection a lot more, so you get more of the details coming in. But right now, when you see the recommendations in MCAS, you can click into the recommendation, and it'll take you to the corresponding portal, so whether it's in a GCP or AWS or Azure.
Oh, okay. From a recommendation perspective.
Yeah,
no, that's cool. The other thing too, I was, while I was listening, was like the limitation around the APIs and the delay, right? So like in Azure Sentinel, I know when we try to get the raw logs in for Office 365, the Office 365 API is notorious because it's not instant, right? It can take, I think, about 15 minutes to maybe 30 minutes sometimes for that activity to finally register and come down. Are you guys seeing the same thing?
Yep.
When you connect the Office 365 API into MCAS and seeing about a 15-minute delay as well in terms of maybe an alert rule you set up?
Yep, that is correct. We definitely see that, but sometimes it could be more too. So
I don't want to downplay it, but
Well, the Office 365 team their SLA is 24 hours as well. So
yeah, that's true. It is stated there.
And some of the things that we do pull from the APIs, like it's on our in our documentation that it's definitely going to be delayed no matter what. Like this information, I can't remember the top of my head. It's 24 hours no matter what, or this is 6 hours, or this is 3 hours before it pops up for sure. So.
Yeah. And I think you actually asked the last question too. I was thinking about was like, what was the craziest scenario you had during these customer calls? You talked about that 10,000.
Yeah, that one caught me off. That one caught me off guard so much because I'm very much so like minimize the amount of alerts you have, right? Minimize it and make your time more efficient. Like go and do something that'll definitely help you, right? I like just on my own, I get bombarded with emails and I'm sitting here like, what? I have all these rules in place to get rid of these emails that I know that I'm not going to go through, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? So that's definitely one of the most bizarre ones I've seen on the alert side. I also had somebody, which is really odd, for Office 365, they wanted us to split the data that was coming into MCAS. And so what I mean by that is, when we're pulling the API, we're getting things from, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, the different apps that we have for Office 365, right? And what they wanted was they wanted it to only include SharePoint information and not OneDrive information. But they didn't want to scope it via our scoping policies. They wanted the API itself for everybody who has access to split it up. So they could choose from the Office 365 API what they wanted in coming into MCAS. And so the reason being their rationale was that they wanted the OneDrive to be personal and they didn't want any administrator to see it using MCAS. And I can kind of see that. And, but at the same time, like it's our app connector and already comes into place. You can scope out different apps that different folks can see in general, or you can scope out the alerts that are being seen. And so we try to go that route, and they ended up using condition access app control instead, which does not pull in any of your existing files, right? It's whatever you're trying to upload or download in real time. So it solved their issue. I don't think so. It's not what I would have recommended, but they were happy with it. I'm like, okay, at the end of the day, it's what you want with a product. I don't think this is the best use, but
exactly. If you want a chocolate chip cookie without the chocolate chips, we'll get that for you. Yeah,
exactly.
So is there so they're generating 1,000, 10,000 alerts. Is there any automation in MCAS to close things out? I mean, how can you deal with that with inside MCAS from an automation standpoint?
So I would say the most common use cases in this case, sorry, I said the same thing there. Most common situation here is that they would use Power Automate. And so within MCAS itself, if you don't use that integration with Power Automate, there's not really a way to kind of go through and automatically have it, close out some of these alerts for you. But we've had customers where they've used Power Automate to go through, they compare it to, like, say, a list of SharePoint sites, and then based on if it's on that list, and they go ahead and close out the alert. Like, this is something that we don't need to see.
Rod, I don't want to hear about watch lists.
Yeah, I was about to say something. Watch list using Power Automate.
The issue with that is, though, you do run into throttling limits.
Right.
So, and that's so it wouldn't work for that 10,000 alert customer that I had, right? So.
Now, I did have a question too, because out of this, what's the most unique thing you've seen with like tuning? You mentioned the Office 365, the 10,000 limits, but you've probably seen some really probably a really neat or really unique kind of tuning scenario come out with our customers, right? Maybe even the third-party API that most customers don't use.
Yep, and actually, I was just going to say that this was with Box. So we have a customer who they're currently using Box right now for all their U.S. citizens, so the U.S. citizen-based employees, and it's where they upload some of their sensitive files. And what they needed was the ability to have multiple and/or situations using MCAS, but because it's a third-party app, using multiple and/or situations using Microsoft Information Protection, but because it's a third-party app, they need to go through MCAS. So what we ended up doing is when you go into a file policy and you're actually using the inspection method, right? You go into using Microsoft Information Protection, that engine is being used to kind of go through and filter the information and find the sensitive information type, right? So they wanted to be able to see multiple different types of information together. So they need an exact data match situation for things like on the medical record number side, and then also a keyword list, in addition to being able to just have one of the built-in information types that had PII information. So in MCAS, we were able to go through and do a situation where we can actually match if all of these pop up, and then use it in Box, because that was a third-party app that they had used, and we kind of configured it so that it would be matching based off of what they're wanting to see. And the cool thing about, and this is kind of a push for a MIP there, Microsoft Information Protection, is that when you create these custom information types, you can actually test in that portal against that file type without actually having to create a policy first. So you can see if it's matching based off of false positives or matching correctly true positive before you create the policy in MCAS, and then have MCAS go through all around in Box and identify those files that needed to be identified and then protect them. So I would say
All right,
that's
so
something that I really enjoyed. And the information protection side, and it made you kind of think outside of the box there. So
all right, so I'm going to ask you questions I know the answer to, but I do this so people understand. Okay. So why would I use MCAS if I have, my compliance capability? So what's the difference? Why would I, from the information protection side?
yep. So MCAS third party. So if you have any third parties at all, you're automatically going to be using MCAS, just because it's where you can go into the different APIs, and we don't have the capability just yet in the compliance portal without using an MCAS integration. Now, on the Office 365 side, it depends on a couple things here. So if you're labeling under 3,000 files, or you have less than 3,000 labeling activities in general, then we recommend going and using MCAS for that matter, so you can go ahead and centralize everything that you have in your environment. Most of the time, it tends to be that customers have thousands of, maybe even in the millions of files, right? And they need to go through and do more labeling activities than 3,000 a day. That's when we recommend going into the compliance portal and using that engine to do auto labeling and auto classification, as then you won't be hitting the 3,000 limit that MCAS has. So it comes down to, is it a third party or first party app? And then how many labeling activities do you need in order to decide if you need MCAS or if you use NEP instead?
Can MCAS do any of the retention stuff that the compliance?
Not at this time, no.
Okay.
Yeah. It is something that we've heard a lot back from our customers, but and our engineering is aware of it, but we're not, right now there's nothing on the roadmap, or there hasn't been really any discussions besides, okay, we know that it's something that they want.
And what's the top 3 things that you see people not doing in MCAS that you wish that they would do?
That's definitely a hard one. So the first one I would say is on the cloud discovery side. And so the reason being, if they don't have something like our integration with Defender for Endpoint, Zscaler, iBoss, Corrado, or Menlo, which are a lot easier to integrate with MCAS, you have to use a log collector, which sets up basically a server that collects from your endpoints and then forwards it into MCAS, right? And so a lot of folks are hesitant to do that because it's another resource that they need to get and then forward that information to MCAS. And I wish they would do it more, because there's just so much valuable data that comes in and anomaly protections that come in that are built into MCAS. That's definitely one that I think is not used enough. The other one is, a lot of folks think that because cloud security is a Microsoft product, that you have to use Azure AD in order to be able to do condition access app control. But we have the ability to use third-party IDPs. And we actually released, I think in the last 6 months, documentation on how to integrate Okta, PingOne. And I know ADFS is technically Microsoft, but that's still considered a third party because it's not Azure AD, right? And so we have those abilities to use that in MCAS. The problem is it's not as simple as just, clicking a couple buttons using our own first-party integration, right? So we have a lot of hesitation there, but there's just so much value in using condition access app control and MCAS, being able to apply the different protections for those sessions as well. And I just don't think a lot of customers use that enough. And a third one right now, I can't think of one. I'm trying to think, because we have a lot of customers who go into managed devices, but I can't think of it right now. Obviously, those are the two.
So I'm confused between, if I want to protect documents on an endpoint, I have Defender for Endpoint, I have to install this AIP thing. Explain this whole thing about protecting documents on the endpoint. Does MCAS even play into that? Explain this use case for me.
Yep, of course. So with MCAS, what you can do is use our, like I said, the condition access app control, but that's browser-based only. And then those apps would have to be single sign-on enabled either through Azure AD or the Okta or PingOne or whichever IDP you have. So what it would do is, if you are logging into that app using SSO on an unmanaged device, you can require that when that person tries to download a file, could be downloading any file or downloading a file that has sensitive information, that a label is automatically applied to it. That is done in the browser using MCAS's reverse proxy, so you don't need to have a client downloaded for that in order to have the protection, and you don't need to have a Defender for Endpoint for that. It's all browser.
Can that be done in Chrome?
You need an extension for that, but yes, it can be done in Chrome.
Okay, so what's this AIP thing or the endpoint for scanning documents? I know this is going compliance side, but tell me about that.
So like the AIP scanner or the
Yeah,
unified client?
yeah, the unified client. So how do I make sure if people have stuff local that it's getting scanned?
Gotcha. So I'll go ahead and try to do my best over here. So if you have things that are stored locally, we do have an AIP scanner. And basically what that does is it goes through your local shares and drives, and it crawls through the files looking for whatever information type that you have selected to be scanned, or just all the files in general. And it'll add in, it'll label those files accordingly based on your policies. So that is for on-prem and local shares. Now, if you're connected to things like, Office 365 and you're using some sort of sync mechanism there, then you can have it be built into the actual product itself. So Microsoft Word, if you have it the built-in labeling client in the Word, in that app itself, or you can actually use the unified labeling client, which is a client that you download onto your workstations, and it'll go through and automatically scan your files for any information type that you've already identified to be labeled. So
Okay.
you could do it on-prem, you could do it based on the app itself, you could do it browser-based, or you could do it also within the app like SharePoint and OneDrive themselves too. So there are different ways of protecting the files.
It's funny because I was talking to a friend. He said they had their customer data. They're like, they didn't trust the IT department, so they decided to copy all the customer data out to a cloud storage provider, just because they didn't trust the IT department. And if something happened, right? I'm almost like shaking my head, and I was also surprised that they didn't actually get caught doing that. Even though they're I understand why they wanted to do that, right? But I was actually surprised that the organization did not catch them copying that data out to that site. But yeah, so how does someone get started from the MCAS information protection implementation?
Gotcha. So for that, the first thing you do is you have to connect your apps, right? So if you're using Office 365, definitely connect that. Enable file monitoring in MCAS, and then of course initiate the integration between MIP and MCAS. So you can kind of go through and be able to filter in those files for the information types. If you're using a third-party app, I would say double check to make sure it's one of our apps that has files API information. That's like G Suite, Dropbox, Box, depending on what you have in place, and connect those apps. So the first step is to definitely connect it. Then within the product itself, if you go under investigate, you have a files repository. All your files will start popping up there. So your first goal could be to just kind of manually take a cursory look to see what you have, or you can create a file policy where you're actually looking for something specific. So depends on things like, do you want to have social security numbers in a public facing folder? Do you want to have credit card numbers that may or may not be PCI DSS compliant, and you have that in somebody's personal OneDrive instead? So I guess the next step is identifying what you want to see, what you want to protect, and where you want to protect it. And then the last step is to just create the policy and monitor on. And that's a very simplified way of saying how to do information protection in MCAS, but really it's a kind of knowing what you want. And for most customers, it's the hard part because they don't know what they want to see in their environments, especially with the third-party apps themselves. So kind of knowing what you want first is probably what's crucial. And once you know that, it's very easy to create the policies.
Excellent. Now I have to ask you this question before we run out of time. So it's the question that we always ask.
Oh no, what is it?
This has to be the easiest question for you of the night. Okay.
Okay.
You're implementing M365 Defender, the 4 products: Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Office 365 ATP, whatever it's called, and MCAS, right? And you've got, let's say it's a 200-seat organization. Which product do you implement first? Out of Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, MCAS, and Office 365 ATP, whatever it's called now.
So On my end, I would say, and I'm going to get so much slack from my team. I would definitely start with Defender for Office first, and then Defender for Identity. And there's a reason why, because you want to make sure that your emails and everything is protected as you're integrating everything into MCAS, right? And then you also want to make sure that your domain controllers are protected as well, and that you're not getting any attacks before you go ahead and get those integrations in place. So those are two that I would definitely do first. And I'm going to get so much back for it. I already know.
So you have to understand, I always say Defender for Endpoint, and Edward always says MCAS. So you actually did not select either one of our favorite ones to go with. So that's pretty good. So Defender for Identity, then I'm going to let these guys finish up with questions. And Rod has a special drink that he's going to be drinking here. So I think the Defender for Identity adoption, how have you seen that? Because I just don't think that organizations understand the importance of it, or do you think that they do and they don't, they just think that the effort, the lift to make that happen isn't worth it? So where do you see Defender for Identity adoption and any challenges that are there?
So I think the main challenge that we see is that folks are very, very nervous to install anything on their DCs. And that's the biggest challenge we have, because most of our detections are built in. There's not much you have to do. You install the sensors on your DCs and it starts feeding the information in. If you're using MCAS, it's just turning on the integration to make sure it's coming in. It's really getting them to take that first step to install it on the sensors. And we're asked all the time, is it secure? Yeah. If it wasn't secure, we wouldn't be telling you to, install this on your DC. And I've seen projects be postponed months because of just this hesitation. And that's the biggest challenge that I've seen. But once the customers do get over that hesitation, they seem to be pretty pleased with the results and kind of what they're seeing and all the different integrations, whether it's with Endpoint, whether it's MCAS, Sentinel. The integrations is what really sells that product even more. And of course, just the overall detections there. But we just need to get over that huge speed bump of just getting them to install the sensor first. It could definitely be a struggle, because no matter how many stats you give them, no matter how much assurance you give them on it, some folks are just like, no, I don't want it on my DC. And you get it, right? It's your DC, and it's something that contains just some of your most sensitive processes, right? So I would say that definitely getting it installed first, but the deployment itself is fairly simple. So.
Right. And the value of it is incredible.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right, do you guys have any final questions before we get into the drinks?
I actually have a question for Frank. Let's start with the comment. One thing I don't think people realize, which I think is really cool to highlight here, is that, okay, so I will admit, I believe from the Ninja training that Microsoft has put out all across the board, I do believe Sentinel was first, but second in the series of Ninja trainings that came out was actually produced by Sarahzin for the MCAS stuff. You were number 2, weren't you? Didn't you create that whole resource?
I did. I created the entire resource, but I feel like I may have been third, because I think Defender for Endpoint was before me.
Or Security Center or whatever.
Yeah.
Yep. Potentially. I'm going to have to look at that.
Defender was not second or third. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I think they were the late comers. Johnny come lately.
Yeah, I'll have to go look at that to verify, but I think it was. But thank you for that, by the way. I think that was awesome. People don't know that was Sarahzin, which is awesome. The other thing about that, which this is a question for Frank. Frank, why is there no MCAS training in the new Security Center or security certifications?
There is.
Which one?
So you go to, if you take a look at SC200, it's actually in the, it's rolled up in the day 2 or let me go to the exact thing. And when you take a look at the learning path for SC200 Part 2, mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender, you will see MCAS in there somewhere.
MCAS is in there.
Yep.
That's a very, very small. Wow.
So it is very small. So there's two sides of that. The reason why it's very small, one is if you take a look at how the courseware is developed, you actually take a look at the I forget the exact terminology, the number of modules that you're allowed to have within inside a learning path. So that's why Defender for Endpoint has its own learning path, is because I could only get 10 or whatever. So I have learn limitations or learn specifications to put that in there. The other thing is that the SC200 is more focused on the responder versus the configure person that's out there. And so that's why it's just that one section right there, even though there's a lot more to it. I have to say that I've been over a lot of the security training out there, and I wouldn't say competitors, but from security vendors or security training companies. And if you take the AZ500, the MS500, the SC200, 300, 400, all that fun stuff, and don't worry about taking the certification. This is going to sound strange. Just take a look at what those roles are and what they're testing you on, and you go out and you learn that stuff inside and out. I mean, this is awesome material and awesome for you to get to know these products, right? And then go take the certification test. Don't worry about the certification test. Make sure that you know what's in those skills measured inside and out, and you'll be good to go. And so MS500 has more about configuring the M365 Defender stuff than what's in the SC200, which is focused on the responder, not the configurer.
Okay.
And I just want to add to that. So MCAS, I believe in March or February, we released our own our modules too for that MS Learn feature for MCAS too. It's not a certification, but we do have an entire set of steps you can go through to kind of learn the product as well. So
okay,
getting closer.
I mean, yeah, even with the SC200, I mean, I've already told them, I'm like, you have to already add another day stuff for everything that's coming out with Sentinel. I mean, I had to develop this content knowing that the unified portal was coming out, but I couldn't actually develop the content for the unified portal because it was not out yet. So that's some of the challenges in putting that content out there.
Yeah.
Nathan, did you have any further questions?
No, not at all. Very impressive. I for whatever reason, never got a really big opportunity to play with Microsoft Cloud App Security. By the time I joined Microsoft back in 2015, Cloud App Security wasn't around. And then, been focusing a lot on the Azure apps and infrastructure side and then Azure security. And so I've just learned quite a lot just listening, and I've got some notes here now and some homework. Definitely want to pass that SC200, and sounds like I can apply these notes and learning a little bit more about how to implement MCAS and use it. I set it up once briefly and just connected Office 365 and Amazon Web Services, but then, have just kind of left it in my demo tenant. So I now have a renewed sense that or a conviction that I need to go out and play with this some more and come up with some better scenarios, I think, with a better together Sentinel and MCAS stories. So thank you so much for all that information and even just providing those unique insights, right? It's awesome when you get to talk with someone from customer experience team, because they get to work on some of the most complex and interesting problems, right, that customers bring. And so just sharing those stories was really inspiring and really interesting.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been great. And it's always great to catch up. We're going to have to catch up otherwise. One of these days, maybe I'll come out and go to Disney. Is it Disney World or Disneyland?
Disneyland.
Disneyland. I always get those mixed up. Yeah. We'll have to go out to Disneyland or something. I'm still looking for my first trip, right? So,
all right, will Ignite be in person this year or not? What's your vote?
I believe it will be. I believe it'll be hybrid. So, yep. All right.
All right. So since you were out of focus there, Rod.
Sorry about that.
All right, so tell us what you're doing here, Rod. I mean,
so we talked about, was this last time we talked about this, or we talked about this some other time? But all these different weird coffees that you could drink. And everybody's familiar with this cat coffee where they literally follow this marsupial around in the jungle somewhere, wait for it to poop out coffee beans, and then they roast them. Well, what I didn't know was that somebody took it to the next level. They literally feed elephants coffee beans in this, I don't know, big mass of lard or something. And as the coffee, and it's refined. It's naturally refined by elephants. It's black ivory coffee. Literally, the beans are broken down by the elephant's digestive enzymes, resulting in a smooth coffee without bitterness. I've never had this before. I thought it'd be awesome. I felt bad that literally you can get like this in a small cup out of this for $50. It's like the most expensive coffee in the world. But at the same time, I felt a little bit better when I realized that all the proceeds from this go to the families that take care of the elephants in Thailand. So anyway, I'm going to try this. It smells really good. All right. Oh, and I bought the cup to go with it. So there's actually a elephant on this side, but on the other side, the side that I have facing everyone,
Is it good?
Is it bitter on a scale 1 to 10?
it's not bitter.
Okay. So as advertised then.
It's really smooth. No, it's really good. I've never had rectum coffee before, so I won't know what to compare it to.
$50 rectum coffee.
Yeah. However, this is really good. So there we go. We've done it. I will drink the rest of this, by the way. This is good.
Oh, guys.
All right.
All right. And do we have a guest for next week lined up yet, Rod?
We're working on that. I'll announce that within the next few days or a couple days.
All right. Sounds good. Any final words from anyone? All quiet.
Seeing heads shaking. Everybody's just tired of talking.
Got the green background still, so.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. And until next time.
All right. Green backgrounds win.